All right, here is another one of our super quick lessons. This one is on endocrine disruptors, which are a type of pollution that can be found in water. So, first, let's talk about what these are. There are some natural sources, there are some man made sources, but they're all chemicals that interfere with the endocrine system. And they do this by either blocking hormones or by mimicking hormones. So, here we see a normal hormone interacting with its receptor, which is here, and that's going to cause some sort of cellular response. If we have a chemical that mimics a hormone, it can also turn on this same cellular response. So it's going to act like that hormone. And then if it's a hormone blocker, it's going to bind to that receptor, keep it from activating a cellular response. So it's going to cause some sort of change inside an animal's body. Now, animals are the only organisms with endocrine systems, so endocrine disruptors work mostly on them, but there are some plant hormones and probably some fungus hormones as well. But I have not come across anything in my research that talks about endocrine disruptors for anything other than animals. So assume if you see this on the test that you're talking about an animal species. So some of the natural sources of endocrine disruptors are soybeans. Soybeans produce some estrogen-like chemicals that can act like estrogen. So if you had somebody who was eating an extremely huge amount of soy, it is possible that they could experience some feminization, which is feminization is like adding womanly characteristics. So it's not full on, it's not a gender change per se. It is kind of adding some feminine characteristics. And we're going to talk about some different species. So we'll talk about that in more detail. Some of the man made types of endocrine disruptors can be found in plastics, pesticides, fireworks, which, if you wonder why I put that there, fireworks are exploded in the air. And so that, kind of rains down onto people. Nonstick coatings like pots and pans, as well as flame retardants. So, very quickly, let's talk about masculinization and feminization. So, if something is masculinized, it is biologically female, but due to exposure to some of these hormones or hormone mimics or blockers, the animal ends up taking on some of the traits of the masculine gender. If it is feminizing, then it is a biological male animal that is taking on some of the female physical traits. Um, so let's take a look. So, how are organisms exposed to some of these chemicals? Well, you can get them through anywhere that you can have physical contact. So, you can eat them or drink them, which is the ingestion that's here. You can inhale them if they're airborne, or you can just have physical contact with them through your skin. If they are airborne, then that means they can spread quite a distance. And most of the times when we're talking about these, though, we're going to be talking about them as a water pollutant. So some of these synthetic chemicals, especially like if you take medicine and you flush it down the toilet or you dump it down the sink, or even if you just throw it in the trash, if that kind of chemical is water soluble, then it can end up in like a drinking water supply. So, what happens with wastewater? We'll talk about wastewater treatment in a later lesson. And unfortunately, wastewater treatment is mostly designed to get rid of solids, as well as, things like urine or stuff like that, biological waste. It's not really designed to get rid of some of these things that are chemicals dissolved in water. And there's such a wide variety of these endocrine disruptors. So, for example, some pesticides, some children products. Like this looks like a baby bottle, so some things found in plastics. Um, some industrial solvents, plastics, and food storage material, which is why you'll see a lot of ads for things that are BPA free because BPA was found to be an endocrine disrupting chemical and it was found in a lot of plastic that was used for food storage. You can find it in electronics and building materials, some personal care products. This looks like deodorant right here. and some medical tubing, some antibacterial chemicals, and some of this stuff has even been put into textiles and chemicals, not for the purpose of disrupting the endocrine system. That's a side effect of it. Something's flame retardant, for example. You treat clothing to make it more flame retardant, that could be a source of an endocrine disrupting chemical. Some other sources are landfill leachate. Leachate is liquid that leaks out of a landfill. Uh, as rain falls on a landfill, it dissolves whatever chemicals are there. And while landfills are supposed to have a non-permeable barrier underneath them to prevent any chemicals from getting washed into groundwater supplies, if you have that improperly done, or if it develops a hole or some other kind of way of breaking that barrier, then you can have those chemicals then leak into a groundwater supply. And you'll notice that some of these pesticides, like DDT, we've mentioned before, as a really big synthetic pesticide that was causing a lot of problems. These pesticides can be washed away in runoff and then carried to the nearest body of water. So the next slide is a doozy. It's got a lot of stuff on it, but it's because I'm putting a lot of examples. So some of the things that endocrine disruptors can do. It can cause birth defects and developmental disorders. So, one example I found is DDT and another plastic related chemical, PCBs, end up getting, like seals end up taking them in, and it ends up making its way to the seals' breast milk, basically. Remember, seals are mammals, so they produce milk, and that ends up being concentrated in seal pups because their only source of nutrition in their early days is their mother's milk. And those chemicals then interfere with the ability of the seal pup to gain fat, which is really important so they can survive in super cold weather. It's led to gender imbalances in fish and other species. So, for example, one thing that some of these chemicals has done is masculinize female marine mollusks, which then can interfere with their ability to produce gametes, sex cells, and being able to reproduce. We've seen increased feminization in some species, especially some fish. And then you'll see like a one feminization trait, some male fish are producing female egg yolk protein, which is not something they're supposed to produce because they're not producing eggs. And there's even been some feminized birds, so male peregrine falcons, that are producing this female egg protein. Then, since the endocrine system also very heavily overlaps with the reproductive system, these chemicals can cause problems with reproduction. So, some of them have been linked to low fertility and birth rates in killer whales. Um, there's a chemical that was used in boat paint to kill off organisms, so a biocide, that's been linked to the sterility of a number of gastropod species. Gastropods are like snails and things like that. And then endocrine disruptors and some types of sunscreen can harm coral reefs. So you may see if you go someplace with a coral reef, they will tell you you have to wear reef safe sunscreen. It's a type that doesn't have some of these endocrine disrupting chemicals because these chemicals can interfere with coral reproduction. They can harm coral DNA and they can cause coral bleaching. Then there's some immune and nervous system dysfunction as well. So PFAS are sometimes called forever chemicals. They really don't break down and they build up in the bodies of lots of organisms. And they've been linked to issues with immune systems of sea otters and bottlenose dolphins, and also reproductive or hormone systems of polar bears. The neural impacts have been decreased levels of a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that's used in nerve cell signaling in aquatic organisms. So all of these are very widespread widespread effects on organisms throughout the animal kingdom. Notice a lot of this focuses on aquatic organisms because, like I said, these endocrine disrupting chemicals are mostly thought of as a water pollutant. So, pretty much, if it's an animal, it's going to be impacted by these endocrine disrupting chemicals because we tend to have some of the same hormones and some of the same hormone receptors that are just found in all animals. So you can have invertebrates affected and vertebrates. So it's going to have impacts on, the whole food chain, the whole food web, the whole ecosystem. So that was your shocking cat face moment for today, and a couple more lessons coming up.